You can give a woman your time, your loyalty, your patience, and your entire heart. And she can still walk away from you and choose a man who seems like he has given her nothing at all. And if that has ever happened to you, if you have ever watched a woman you genuinely cared about leave you for someone who seemed less devoted, less consistent, and less emotionally present than you were, then I need you to stop blaming yourself for a moment and listen carefully. Because what destroyed that situation was not your effort. It was not your love. It was not even your character. What destroyed it was something most men are never taught to understand. Attraction is not a reward system. It is not something a woman hands out to the man who works the hardest for it or suffers the most trying to earn it. Attraction is a response. It is something that happens inside a woman before logic even enters the room. Before she knows your story, before she understands your depth, before she sees how consistent and loyal and real you actually are. And once you truly understand that, everything you thought you knew about women, about dating, about why you keep getting overlooked, starts to collapse and rebuild itself into something far more honest. In this video, I am going to show you exactly how women actually select men. Not the version men tell themselves when they want to feel better about rejection, the real version. The version that explains why some men walk into a room and pull attention without trying, why some men seem to win in dating without doing what you were told would make you desirable, and why men who give the most often end up with the least. Before we go any further, I want you to be honest with yourself right now. Have you ever been in a situation where you knew, with complete certainty, that you were the better man, the more loyal man, the more emotionally available man, and still lost? Comment invisible below. Because what you are about to hear is going to explain that moment in a way that finally makes sense. The first thing you need to understand is the one thing most men spend their entire lives trying to escape. Women experience you before they ever know you, before she hears a single word you say, before she learns what you do for a living, or discovers how good your heart is, or finds out how much you have been through in life. She has already made a subconscious decision about you. She has already felt something in your direction, and that feeling was not created by your personality. It was not created by your intentions. It was created entirely by your presence. The energy you carry when you walk into a space, the way your body moves. Whether your posture communicates that you belong where you are standing, or whether it quietly apologizes for taking up space, whether your eyes look like they are searching for approval or resting in quiet confidence, whether your entire energy feels grounded and certain or fragile and desperate for something to hold on to. Most men have been taught that if they are kind enough, if they are patient enough, if they are consistent enough, a woman will eventually see their value and attraction will follow naturally. And that belief has quietly destroyed the dating lives of millions of good men, because presence is not personality, and women feel presence first. A man can be the most genuinely good human being in the room, but if his energy leaks insecurity the moment he enters, if his body language collapses before he even speaks, if every move he makes silently begs the room to accept him, women feel that long before they ever get close enough to discover who he really is underneath. And once a woman feels that kind of desperate energy radiating from a man, it does not matter what comes after it. The damage is already done in those first few seconds of silence. I have watched men blame their looks. I have watched men blame their height. I have watched men blame their income or their background or their circumstances. But the truth most men refuse to sit with is this. The man who walks into that same room with the same face, the same height, the same bank account, but carries himself like he already knows his value, gets treated completely differently. Women notice that difference instantly. They do not need to analyze it. They do not need to sit down and make a logical list. They feel it. And what they feel in those first silent seconds creates an emotional foundation that almost nothing else can completely rebuild afterward. That is not shallow. That is human psychology working exactly the way it was designed to work. People read signals automatically. Women are reading yours, whether you are aware of it or not. And the question is not whether they are reading them. The question is what those signals are currently saying about you. Now let me tell you something that is going to be uncomfortable for a lot of men to hear. And I need you to stay with me here instead of getting defensive, because this truth has the power to completely change how women respond to you the moment you finally accept it. Most men who struggle with attraction are not unattractive. They are neglected. And there is a difference between those two things that most men never stop long enough to recognize. An unattractive man lacks something he cannot easily control. A neglected man has slowly stopped showing up for himself because life wore him down, and he quietly let it. He stopped taking care of his body. He stopped paying attention to how he presents himself to the world. He stopped doing the things that once made him feel sharp and alive and certain about who he was. And then he walks through his days confused about why women do not respond to him the way he wishes they would, never connecting the dots between how he is treating himself and how the world is treating him back. Women notice self-neglect immediately, not because they are judging you harshly or holding you to some impossible standard, but because self-neglect sends a signal that goes much deeper than appearance. When a man stops taking care of himself physically, when his posture is permanently defeated, when his clothes look like he stopped caring, when his energy feels heavy and disconnected from any sense of pride or purpose, women do not just see a man who needs a haircut or a better wardrobe. They see a man who has quietly given up on himself. And that tells them something dangerous about what life would feel like standing next to him long term. Women are not only responding to how you look in the moment, they are responding to what how you look communicates about how you feel about yourself. And a man who clearly does not respect himself enough to take care of himself is a man who is telling the world, without saying a single word, that he does not believe his own life is worth the effort. I have seen men completely transform how women respond to them without changing a single thing about their face or their genetics. They started going to the gym consistently. They fixed their posture. They started dressing with intention instead of wearing whatever was closest to them on the floor. They slowed down how they moved and how they spoke. They stopped carrying themselves like men who were apologizing for existing. And suddenly the world around them shifted. Women who had previously looked through them started looking at them. Not because those men became someone completely different, but because they finally stopped projecting the energy of a man who had abandoned himself a long time ago and never come back. And here is the part that destroys attraction faster than bad genetics ever could. Desperation. A man who constantly needs reassurance from women is a man who is slowly suffocating every room he walks into. Women feel desperation before a man even opens his mouth. They feel it in the way he tries too hard to be funny. They feel it in the compliments that come too fast and too heavy before any real connection has been built. They feel it in the way his entire emotional state shifts based on whether she responded to his message or laughed at his joke or gave him a moment of her attention. That energy is not attractive. That energy is exhausting. And it communicates something to women that no amount of good intentions can undo. It tells them that this man's sense of value is completely dependent on their reaction to him. And once a woman feels that, she instinctively pulls back. Not because she is cruel, but because emotional neediness feels like a weight she is being asked to carry. And no woman wants to enter a relationship knowing she is responsible for holding a man's self-worth together. This is why two men can walk into the exact same room wearing the exact same clothes and get treated entirely differently by the same women. One man moves through the space like he already has somewhere important to be. He is not scanning the room for approval. He is not adjusting his behavior based on who is watching. He exists in that room with a kind of quiet certainty that does not need anyone else to confirm it. The other man is performing. Every move is calculated for reaction. Every word is chosen to impress. Every action is quietly begging the room to validate him. And women feel that difference in seconds. The first man feels like a discovery. The second man feels like a burden. That is the brutal reality of what neglect and desperation do to a man's attractiveness. They do not just make him less appealing on the surface, they make him feel emotionally unsafe to be around. Because a woman knows, even if she never says it out loud, that a man who cannot hold himself together without her approval is a man who will eventually make her responsible for his entire emotional world. And that is a responsibility most women will quietly walk away from before they ever fully commit to it. The moment a man starts showing up for himself, starts treating his own life like it is worth the investment of his time and energy and attention, something shifts in the signals he sends out into every room he enters. He stops looking like a man who is waiting for someone to save him. He starts looking like a man who is already building something worth being a part of. And that shift, that quiet but unmistakable shift in how a man carries the weight of his own existence, changes everything about how women experience him before a single word of conversation has even begun. Now we get to the truth that makes the most men emotional when they first hear it. And I understand why. Because this one is personal. This one hits the part of a man that has been trying his hardest and still watching life stay exactly where it was. Women care about direction, not your potential, not your promises, not the version of yourself you keep describing to people in conversation without ever actually becoming it. Direction, real movement, the kind that does not need to be explained because it is already visible in how a man carries himself, how he spends his time, how he makes decisions, and what his life actually looks like when nobody is watching him perform for approval. And before any man gets defensive about this and turns it into a conversation about money or materialism, I need you to hear what I am actually saying. This is not about being rich. This is not about having a luxury car or an expensive apartment or a social media page that makes your life look impressive from the outside. Women are not only responding to money itself, they are responding to what money and ambition and focused effort represent underneath the surface. They are responding to discipline. They are responding to consistency. They are responding to the evidence that a man is capable of organizing his life and moving it forward instead of standing perfectly still while making endless excuses about why progress keeps escaping him. A man with direction feels different from a man without it, even when that man is still building, even when he is nowhere near where he wants to eventually be. There is a quality in a man who knows where he is going that women feel long before they ever see the destination he is moving toward. I have watched men become deeply attractive to women the moment their life developed momentum. Not when they became rich, not when they achieved some massive external goal, the moment they became genuinely focused. The moment they woke up with purpose instead of obligation. The moment their decisions started reflecting a man who was building something real instead of a man who was simply passing through his own life without a clear reason for being there. Suddenly those men spoke differently, moved differently, held conversations differently. They stopped obsessing over every female reaction because their identity was no longer fragile enough to depend on it. Their life had weight. Their days had direction. And women felt that weight and that direction immediately, even in the most ordinary interactions. But here is where most men quietly destroy themselves and never fully understand why. They build their entire emotional world around women because they have nothing else strong enough to anchor them. They wake up thinking about women. They go to sleep replaying conversations with women. Every text message that goes unanswered controls their entire mood for the day. Every moment of rejection lands like a blow to the center of who they believe themselves to be. Every female opinion about them carries the power to either lift them completely or collapse them entirely. And the reason this happens is not weakness. The reason this happens is emptiness. A man with no real mission, no real direction, no real sense of what he is building and why, has nothing else to pour his emotional energy into. So women become the mission. Women become the purpose. Women become the entire reason he gets up and moves through his days. And that is one of the most dangerous places a man can find himself. Because a man without direction becomes emotionally available to every distraction that crosses his path. He becomes reactive. Every rejection sends him spiraling. Every moment of female attention sends him floating. His emotional state is completely at the mercy of things outside his control. And women feel that instability faster than men realize. They feel the difference between a man who is choosing to be present with them and a man who is desperately clinging to them because he has nowhere else emotionally safe to land. One of those men feels like a choice. The other feels like a trap, and women have a deep instinct for recognizing which one they are standing in front of, even when that man is working very hard to hide it. A man with direction feels calm in a way that has nothing to do with his circumstances. He can be going through a difficult season financially. He can be in the middle of building something that has not paid off yet. He can be facing real pressure and real uncertainty about how things are going to unfold. But underneath all of that, there is a steadiness in him. A sense that he knows why he is doing what he is doing. A sense that even when things are hard, he is not lost. He is simply in the middle of something that requires him to keep moving. And women can feel that steadiness. They can feel the difference between a man who is temporarily struggling and a man who is permanently adrift. One of those men inspires a woman to stay and build something. The other quietly convinces her that there is nothing solid enough here to build on. And this is where many men are completely blindsided in relationships they thought were stable. He thinks everything is fine because she is still physically present. He thinks her staying means she is satisfied. But what he does not see is what has been happening underneath the surface for months, or sometimes years, before the moment everything finally breaks open. She has been watching his patterns. She has been watching whether he grows or stays exactly the same year after year. She has been watching how he handles pressure, whether he takes responsibility for his life or finds someone else to blame for it, whether he uses difficulty as fuel or uses it as an excuse to stop moving entirely, and slowly, quietly, without ever making an announcement about it, she has been losing faith in the direction of his life. Not in him as a person necessarily, but in the idea that life next to him is going somewhere worth going. Women do not only listen to what men say, they study what men do over time. They study habits. They study patterns. They study the distance between what a man promises and what a man actually produces when the pressure of real life is applied to him. Because underneath every relationship a woman enters, she is asking herself one question that she may never say out loud. What will life actually feel like next to this man in 5 years? Not what will he tell me it will feel like, not what does he promise when he is trying to keep me close. What will it actually feel like based on the evidence of who he already is and how he already lives? That question shapes everything, and most men never realize it is being asked until the moment the answer has already been decided without them. This is why men must stop building themselves to impress women and start building themselves because their life demands it. Because a man who loses control over his direction loses control over everything connected to it eventually. His confidence suffers. His standards suffer. His ability to hold himself together under pressure suffers. And all of it bleeds into how women experience him, even when he is trying his hardest to keep that reality hidden behind a performance of confidence he no longer actually feels. Now let us talk about something most men completely misunderstand when they first encounter it: status. And the moment most men hear that word, their mind immediately goes to the most obvious version of it. Celebrities, millionaires, men with massive social media followings and expensive cars and lives that look impressive on a screen. And because most men do not have those things, they immediately dismiss the entire conversation and tell themselves that status does not apply to them. But that is exactly the misunderstanding that keeps so many good men invisible in spaces where they should be commanding attention. Because real status is not what most men think it is. Real status is far quieter than that. And it is far more accessible than the version most men have been sold. Real status is social proof. It is the way the world responds to your presence before you have had the chance to explain yourself to anyone in the room. It is the subtle shift that happens when you walk into a space and people naturally orient toward you. not because you demanded it, not because you performed for it, but because something about how you carry yourself, how you have built your life, how others already speak about you and respond to you, communicates that you are a man who matters somewhere in the world. And women notice those signals with a speed and accuracy that most men would find genuinely unsettling if they truly understood it. Have you ever watched a man walk into a room and felt the atmosphere around him quietly shift? He is not necessarily the best-looking man there. He is not the loudest. He is not the one working the hardest to be noticed, but people acknowledge him differently. They listen when he speaks without needing to be asked to pay attention. They give him space without him having to demand it. The energy around him has a kind of gravity that pulls people toward him naturally, rather than pushing them away with
effort. Women see that, women feel that. And what they are responding to in those moments is not a performance. It is evidence. Evidence that this man has already been chosen by life in some meaningful way. Evidence that other people have already decided he is worth their attention and their trust and their respect. And human beings, women included, are naturally drawn toward what other people have already decided is valuable. This is why status is not really about showing off. It is not about making sure everyone in the room knows what you have or what you have achieved or what your life looks like when it is presented in the most flattering possible light. Real status never needs to announce itself. Real status walks into a room and lets the response of other people do all the announcing. And the men who understand this stop trying to convince women of their value directly. They focus instead on building a life that already demonstrates that value through the way the world around them responds to their existence. And here is what most men never fully consider when they think about status and attraction. Women do not only study you directly, they study how the world responds to you. They watch how other people treat you when you are not performing for anyone. They notice whether people come to you for leadership or overlook you when decisions need to be made. They notice whether your presence adds something to a room or quietly disappears into the background of it. They notice how you are spoken about when you are not there to manage the narrative yourself. All of those things create a picture in a woman's mind about who you are and what your life actually represents before she has ever sat down and had a real conversation with you. And that picture shapes attraction in ways that no amount of direct charm or persistent effort can fully override. This is also why men who constantly seek validation destroy their own status without ever realizing they are doing it. The harder a man tries to convince people he matters, the less important he tends to appear. Because real value does not chase attention. Real value creates a kind of quiet gravity that attention naturally moves toward on its own. A man who is constantly performing for approval, constantly trying to make sure everyone around him recognizes his worth, constantly working to manage how he is perceived in every interaction, communicates one thing louder than anything else he is doing. He communicates that without the performance, there is not much there. And women feel that emptiness behind the performance, even when the performance itself is technically impressive. But now I need to bring you to the place where most men finally lose themselves completely. And this is the part of the conversation that matters more than all the other parts combined. Because after a man hears everything we have talked about so far, after he understands that women respond to presence and self-respect and direction and status, something dangerous can happen inside him. He can take all of that information and turn it into a new performance, a more sophisticated performance, a more calculated version of the same desperation, wearing a different mask. He starts trying to become whatever he believes women want most. He starts adjusting his personality based on what he thinks will be most attractive in any given moment. He becomes softer when he thinks softness will win her over. He becomes harder when he thinks dominance is what she is looking for. He changes his boundaries, his standards, his values, his entire way of moving through the world, all in the name of becoming more desirable to women who were never truly certain about him in the first place. I have seen men completely abandon who they actually are just to hold on to a woman who was never fully satisfied with anything they offered. He over-explains himself to avoid conflict. He overgives to prove his loyalty is real. He tolerates treatment he would never accept from anyone else because he is terrified that the moment he holds a boundary, she will leave. And slowly, piece by piece, he stops being himself. He becomes a version of himself that was built entirely around managing her emotional reactions. Every part of his identity becomes reactive to her mood. Every decision he makes runs through the filter of whether she will approve of it. He is no longer living his life. He is performing in the hope that the performance will finally be good enough to make her stay. And that is not love. That is emotional survival mode. That is a man so afraid of being alone that he has made himself into whatever shape he thinks will fit most comfortably into someone else's life. And women feel that collapse happening even when men believe they are hiding it perfectly, because the very thing that creates attraction in a man is the same thing that disappears the moment he starts performing for approval. That grounded, certain, unhurried energy that made her feel something in the first place does not survive desperation. It cannot coexist with a man who has quietly decided that her approval is worth more than his own identity. And once that energy is gone, once a woman can feel that a man has reorganized his entire inner world around keeping her close, something in her begins pulling back, not always consciously, not always immediately, but the attraction starts quietly draining out of the connection in a way that no amount of effort or grand gestures or emotional conversations can fully reverse. The men who finally escape this trap all arrive at the same realization through different paths and different pain. Peace begins the moment a man stops centering his entire life around whether women approve of him. That sounds simple. It sounds almost obvious when you say it out loud. But for a man who has spent years building his identity around being chosen, around being wanted, around finally being seen as enough by the women he desires most, that realization is one of the most difficult and most liberating things he will ever sit with, because it requires him to accept something that feels like loss before it starts feeling like freedom. It requires him to accept that his value is not something that gets confirmed by female approval. His value exists whether anyone chooses to recognize it or not. And the moment he stops needing that confirmation from outside himself, everything about how he moves through the world begins to change in ways that cannot be faked or performed or manufactured for effect. His energy changes. His decisions become clearer. His standards become things he actually holds instead of things he describes, and then immediately abandons the moment someone attractive enough pushes against them. He starts choosing instead of waiting to be chosen. He starts observing women's behavior with clarity instead of through the distorting lens of what he desperately wants them to be. He becomes patient in a way that is not passive, selective in a way that is not cold, calm in a way that has nothing to do with indifference and everything to do with a man who finally knows who he is before a relationship enters the picture and is no longer willing to trade that knowledge for temporary attention from someone who was never fully convinced by him. That is what women are truly responding to underneath all the surface level signals of attraction. They are responding to a man who is complete before she arrives. A man whose life already has meaning and weight and direction that exists independently of whether she stays or goes. A man who makes her feel like she is being chosen by someone who had other options and chose her deliberately, rather than someone who grabbed onto her because she was the first person to show him any warmth. That feeling, that sense that a genuinely solid man has decided she is worth his specific attention, is one of the most powerful things a woman can experience in the presence of a man. And it cannot be manufactured. It cannot be performed. It can only come from a man who has actually done the work of becoming solid within himself before he ever started looking for it in someone else. So when you step back and look at all of it clearly, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Women experience your presence before your personality. They read self-respect before they read character. They feel direction before they hear promises. They notice how the world responds to you before they decide how they want to respond to you themselves. And underneath all of it, what they are searching for, even when they cannot articulate it, even when their own choices seem contradictory and confusing from the outside, is a man who is grounded enough in himself that being with him feels like safety rather than uncertainty. This video was never about blaming women for how attraction works. It was never about turning men against women or convincing anyone that the game is rigged beyond the point of playing. It was about waking men up to the truth that most of them have been spending their energy in entirely the wrong direction for years, trying to become good enough for people who were never fully certain about them, performing loyalty for women who were never fully present, over-giving to connections that were never fully equal, and slowly losing themselves in the process of trying to be chosen by people whose approval was never going to fill the emptiness they were carrying before those women ever arrived. Your work as a man is not to become perfect for women. Your work is to become solid within yourself, solid in your body, solid in your discipline, solid in the direction of your life, solid in your standards and what you are and are not willing to accept from the people you allow close to you. Because when a man becomes truly solid, rejection stops feeling like destruction. Invisibility stops feeling like a verdict on his worth.
He stops moving through relationships from a place of fear and starts moving from a place of genuine choice. And that changes everything about the kind of connections he builds and the kind of women who stay long enough to build something real with him. If this video hit something inside you that you have been carrying for a long time, comment "build first" below. Because the men who build themselves before they chase anyone else always end up seeing relationships more clearly than the men who spent those same years chasing validation from people who were never truly convinced. Subscribe if you want more videos that tell you the truth about the psychology behind what you are experiencing in dating and relationships. Because the truth, as uncomfortable as it sometimes feels in the moment you first hear it, is always the only thing that actually sets a man free. If this video finally said what you have been feeling but could not put into words, do not let it stop here. Subscribe right now. Because every week, I put out videos that tell men the truth about attraction, about relationships, about why good men keep losing, and what it actually takes to change that. Not surface-level advice. Not tips and tricks designed to manipulate women into liking you. Real psychology, real patterns, real conversations that most men never get to have with anyone in their lives. And if you know another man who needs to hear this today, share this video with him, because the men around you are struggling with the same things you are struggling with. And sometimes, one video at the right moment changes the entire direction of a man's life. Comment "build first" below if you are done chasing and ready to start building. I will see you in the next one.